Good evening, everyone. Hi, everybody. I hope you had a fantastic and wonderful Friday. Are you glad it's the weekend? I know I am. Well, you guys know what today is. Today is Friday. We are still within our Algebra 1, exploring the math of the unknown and learning the different key points of algebra. And what better way to do it than to go through the book, explain different key steps that allow you to understand, learn, comprehend, and accept Algebra 1 in math. So, if you are ready to get started, please click the like button, the heart button, any of the happy buttons. And as soon as you click that to let me know that you can hear me, we can get started. Thank you. Let's get started. All right, so when we last talked and left off, we were dealing with point slope form. Just to recap what we did with point slope simply says that if I have a slope, which is m, and I have a point, which would be x1 and y1, then I can plug my number in point slope form into this formula. The formula you see in front of you is called point slope form. So, say for instance, I have the point 2, 1, and my slope is 2. All you have to do with the slope and the point is substitute, interchange, exchange, or just change the slope, the x1, the y1 to its respective numbers. So y minus y1 is, of course, the number 1 equals my slope, which is 2, parentheses, x minus my x1, which is 2, and you're done. Whenever someone asks you, especially a math teacher, if they ask you for, or if you're a parent that's tutoring your child and it's asking for the point slope form, this is what they mean. Now, what if my points are negative, like -2 and -1? Well, pull this up a little bit. If they are negative, here's what we do. You'll take y minus parenthesis a -1, because my y1 is -1, equals 2, which is my slope, times x minus parenthesis a -2, because my x1 was -2, and I close my parenthesis. Now, if you remember this week, when you see a negative to a negative, you make it positive. So your y is brought down. The negative, the minus -1 becomes +1 with an equal sign of 2 times x minus to minus make plus 2, and you close your parenthesis. Any questions on the recap of our point slope? All right, we are going to move on to our next lesson. Now, next part of our lesson, we are going to learn about how do I find my slope in case I have 2 points. Well, slope has its own formula such as m equals the second y minus the first y over the second x minus the first x. Now, you can also do the first y minus the second y and the first x minus the second x. Whether you do y2 minus y1 or y1 minus y2, make sure that everything is following in the exact same format. So the 2's are under each other as well as the 1's are under each other. Reason being, you don't want to have y2 minus y1 and then you have x1 minus x2 under each other, because then you'll get a different number or answer that you're not looking for. So whenever you're trying to find your slope with 2 points, this is the formula you use. For example, zero, comma, -1, and -6, comma, -9. Now, you must label both of these points. So that way you know which one's going to be x1, y1, which one's going to be x2, y2. So, of course, first point I wrote, I will make that my x1, y1. Then I'm going to make this my x2, y2. And now, since I've labeled my point, I can now solve with either of my points. If you give me one quick moment, I am going to expand my screen so you can see it fully. Now, if I do it based off of y2 minus y1, that means that is -9 minus the -1, and all of that is over -6 minus 0. If you decide you want to do y1 minus y2, you flip them. You have -1 minus -9. And then you have 0 minus the -6. Now, whichever one you do, as you notice, 2, y1, x2, x1, or y1, y2, x1, x2. Now, To solve the top one, I have -9. Negative to negative make that positive, so that's +1. And -6 minus 0, that is still a -6. -9 plus 1, that gives me a -8 over -6. Which, when I am done, that's going to be 8 over 6. Or when you simplify it, meaning reduce it to its lowest terms, since 8 and 6 have 2 in common, 8 divided by 2, that gives me 4. And 6 divided by 2 gives me 3. Now, for the second one, same process. You have -1, negative, and negative, that makes positive, so that's +9 over 0 minus a -6, 0 minus 0 with a minus minus, that makes that +6. And of course, that equals -1 plus 9, that gives me 8. 0 plus 6, that gives me 6. Well, what do you know? We still end up with what? 8 over 6, which when we simplify it again, it is still 4 over 3, or 4/3. Any questions about the slope formula? If you notice, with all of our formulas, all I'm doing is labeling and substituting. Majority of the formulas that you're going to see in Algebra 1, you are labeling and substituting to solve. Why? Because variable humor. The reason why there is a y, an x, a v, we're solving for the unknown. If we only just put numbers, we will never know what we're solving for. So to find the slope, you have to plug in your points. And to plug in your points, you must label your points. So, as you can see, I started at m equals y, the second y minus the first y, and the second x minus the first x. And you can either do it the top equation or the bottom equation, which is the first y minus the second y, and the first x minus the second x. But make sure your ones are lined up under each other and your twos are lined up under each other. Otherwise, you will not get the correct number. Also, labeling is important. My first point, I made it x1, y1. My second point, I made it x2, y2. Simple. Because x is always the first coordinate, y is always the second coordinate. So in my first coordinate, the first x was 0, the first y was -1, the second x was -6, and the second y was -9. So once I have labeled, substitute. After I substitute, I can then solve each equation. And as you can see, with both formulas, I was able to come up with the same answer. Therefore, make sure you, one, are labeling correctly and you are substituting correctly. If not, you won't get the same answers like these. Any questions before we move on to standard form? All right, moving right along. Standard form. Standard form for a linear equation is the coefficient a times the variable x plus the coefficient b times the variable y. And if I'm not mistaken, yep, and it equals c. Now, when I was in school, it used to be where you could do ax plus b. Probably would help if I don't write it so raggedy. ax plus by plus c equals 0. Now, that was the standard that I knew, but some things changed. So now, this is the standard form for linear equations. Now, the only reason why this is being shown is because guess what? There will be questions asking you to show the standard form of a linear equation. So, how do you do the standard form of a linear equation? There are two different ways that you can do this, especially if you have 1 point and a slope, or you have 2 points where you have to find the slope and the whole point and the whole slope point formula. So, first thing I'm going to show you is the point slope formation, where you can go from point slope to from point slope to standard form, and then we are going to go from 2 points to standard form. And this I will make sure that I take time and questions, okay? So, first thing we're going to do is point slope. Point slope means I have 1 point, which my point is -3 and 2, and my slope is 1. So now, if you remember the point slope formula, it is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, right? So, since we have this information, label my point x1, y1, and then I substitute or plug in y minus 2 for my y1 equals 1, which is m, x minus a -3. Simple enough, right? After I do that, I bring down my y minus 2 equals 1 times x. Minus to minus makes +3, and I close my parenthesis. Now, once I do that, bring down my y minus 2 again. That equals, of course, 1 times anything is itself, and that gives me x plus 3. Now, you can do this 2 ways. You can either move the 2 to the right, then move the x to the left, or you can move the x to the left, then the 2 to the right, or you can do both at the same time. Whichever level you are comfortable with, that is the level I would recommend you choose. Now, for the long way, what you can do is move the x first, which will be negative x, and you will minus x on both sides, which will give me negative x plus y minus 2 equals 3. Once I have moved my x, then I can move my 2. So plus 2 on both sides, and my negative x plus y equals 5. That is my standard form. Any questions on this form of the standard form? All right. Here's another problem. Same instance. So now you have let's see, because I want one that does not have a negative in it. Looks like all of them have the negative in it. Found one. All right, so now you have 4, 1, and the slope is 3. Label my point, x1, y1, and write my formula. Now, substitute y minus one equals 3 times x minus 4. Bring down my y minus 1 equals, distribute my 3, and that gives me 3x minus 12, because 3 times x is 3x. 3 times negative 4 is a negative 12. And I bring those down. After that, let's switch it up. I can add 1 on both sides. Once I do that, I will have y equals three x minus 12 plus 1 will give me a minus 11. After I have my 3x minus 11, I then can subtract my 3x on both sides. And my standard form is negative 3x plus y equals a negative 11. Any questions? All right. Now, what if you have 2 points and no slope? No problem. We can solve this. Going to do negative 8 and 4 and 4 and negative 4. Now, x x1, y1, x2, y2. Make sure you are labeling your first x as x1, first y is y1, second x is x2, second y is y2. Now, if you beautiful people remember, we did something called the slope formula. So now, slope formula says y2 minus y1, or your x2, or your y1 minus y2. Just make sure your 2's are lined up and your 1's are lined up like so. Now that we have written our formula, we can now find our slope. So y2, that is negative 4. y1, make sure you put your minus sign. y1 is a positive 4, so all you have to do is a minus 4. Draw your line. X2, that's a positive 4. Minus x1, that's a negative number, so we must put our parentheses and put in parenthesis negative 8. After that, negative 4 minus 4, that gives me a negative 8. Same signs, add them together. Minus a negative is 4 plus a positive 8, because minus to minus makes it a plus. So now, negative 8 over 4 plus 8 is negative 8 over 12. Simplified, that is negative 2 over 3. So now that I've found my slope, I can now do point slope. Point slope will allow me to set up my standard form. Now with point slope, you can use either one of those points. I prefer to use the first one because the first one is already labeled as x1, y1. So why not? So now, negative 8, comma 4, that's my x1, y1, and my slope is a negative 2/3. Point slope formula, y equals, well, correction, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Plug in, I have y minus y1 is 4 equals m, which is negative 2/3, parenthesis x minus 8. Now, typically, we go ahead and, you know what? We still can. I'm still going to do that. So we have y minus 4 equals, distribute, negative 2/3 times x, that's negative 2/3x. Then you have negative 2/3 times a negative 8. That gives me a positive, because negative negative makes positive, plus negative 2 to negative 8, because a whole number is just in fraction form is 8/1. Negative 2 times a negative 8 gives me a positive 16. And that gives me a positive 3. Now, I'm going to move my 4 to the other side, which means I'm going to add it to my 16/3. So that's plus 4 on both sides. Now, if you remember or need a quick refresher, in order to add this whole number to the fraction, you must convert it into a whole fraction. And what I mean by is you would need for it to be in the fraction form over 3. So now, what divided by 3 is going to give me 4? Well, we know that 12 divided by 3 gives me 4. So now I have changed the 4 into 12/3. I know you guys like, Miss Chris, what in the world are you doing? I'm trying to make sure that I add my numbers together. And since there is a fraction, in order to add a whole number to a fraction, you must change that whole number into its fraction form. So the fraction form of 4 in relates to 3 is 12/3. Reason being, 12 divided by 3, or what times 3 gives me 12, is 4. So now that I've changed my 4 into 12/3, I can erase it from here and bring down my y, which is by itself now, because the negative 4 and plus 4 canceled, which leaves me with a negative 2/3 x, and 16 plus 12, that gives me plus 28/3, because 6 plus 2 is 8, 1 plus 1 is 2. Now that I have done that, if you notice in standard form, there are no fractions. When it comes to the standard form, there are no fractions. So how do I get rid of the fraction on the right side to make it in standard form and continue with my problem? Well, in order to do that, I must multiply everything by 3. Now, once I multiply everything by 3, the 3's under 2 and the 3 that is under 28, that will go away. And then the 3 times the y, that will give me 3y. Now remember, when you're multiplying the outside number within the parentheses, you're distributing it to each part of the equation. So now 3y equals a negative 2x plus 28. So now all I have to do is move my 2x to the other side to get my standard form. So plus 2x plus 2x and my answer is 2x plus 3y, and that equals 28. And that is how I get my standard form. Any questions? All right, guys, let's try this again. Now, class, I will admit that I forgot one of the most important things in math that you should never, ever do. And someone didn't catch me. So I caught myself. Important rule when you are doing equations, always remember your signs. Since my x1 was a negative, the x minus shouldn't have been x minus 8. It should have been x minus a negative 8. I do apologize. I caught my error, and now I'm starting over. Now, what happens if you do make this error? Guess what? You will do it, because if I can do it, I know you can do it too. And it happens. You will make mistakes, and it's okay to make the mistake. The question is, once you make that mistake, make sure you learn from it, grow from it, and start over. Okay? which is why you always double check your answers and your work before you turn it in. So now, I still bring down my y, minus 4, and that equals negative 2/3 x, and the minus minus becomes a plus 8, and you close the parenthesis. Once I've done that, I bring down my y minus 4. I distribute my negative 2/3 to x and 8, and that becomes negative 2/3 x minus 16 over 3. So now we still process the same way. Add 4 on both sides. My 4 becomes a 12 over 3, because 12 divided by 3, that gives me 4. So I can take that away. I bring down my y equals negative 2/3 x, and 16 minus 12 is a negative 4 over 3. Because 6 minus 2 is 4, 1 minus 1 is 0. The bigger number is negative, therefore your answer must be negative. Got it? Great. Now, we still are going to multiply by a 3. That way I can multiply the 3 to the y and get rid of the 3's under my negative 2 and my negative 4. My negative 2x and my negative 4. So now I have 3y equals negative 2x, because the 3's cancel from there, minus 4, because the 3 cancels from there. Then I'm going to add my 2x on both sides. As you can see, I don't put my 2x under my 3y. They are not the same variable, so you do not place them under each other. Which will give me 2x plus 3y, and that equals a negative 4. Any questions before we move on from standard form? All right, we will move on to parallel. and perpendicular lines. So how do we write equations for parallel and perpendicular lines? Parallel lines, that means these lines never touch. They go on forever and ever and ever and ever a day, and they will never touch. And the reason why they will never touch is because they have the same slope. So if you have two parallel lines, that means they have the exact same slope. Their y-intercept will be different, their coordinates will be different, but they will never touch because the first line slope will equal the second line slope. Now, for perpendicular lines, the slope of the first one must be Make sure I say this right. So the slope of the first one and the negative reciprocal, which is the flip inverse slope of the second one, when they multiply together, should be -1. So, say for instance, you have an equation where it says write an equation of the line that passes through the given point and is parallel to the given line. So, when you're dealing with parallel and perpendicular, you will hear the question of write an equation of the line that passes through the given point and is parallel or is perpendicular to the given line. So now, for parallel, here's an example. Parallel, I have the point of -1, 3, and I have a given line of y equals 2x plus 2. So now if you remember slope-intercept, intercept says y equals mx plus b, where m is my slope, b is my y-intercept. So now we are given a line. What you are trying to find is another line parallel to this line, and the points -1 and 3 is on the paralleled line. So how do I find this line? How do I write the equation and find the parallel line to y equals 2x plus 2? First, I will write y equals mx plus b. You have your slope, you have your x, you have your y. Now you must find your b. Your b is your y-intercept. What differentiates the slopes that are parallel to each other are their y-intercepts, meaning where do they touch on the y-axis. So for y equals 2x plus 2, the y-intercept is 0, 2. So now we need to find the y-intercept of the parallel line so that way we can actually write the equation of the parallel line. So y would equal 3, m will equal 2, because they have to have the exact same slope. X will equal a -1, and b is what we are trying to find. So now bring down my 3, and that equals 2 times a -1. 2 times a -1, that gives me -2. And of course, I add my b. Now, to get b by itself, we're solving for the unknown. Still doing algebra. We will add 2 on both sides. 3 plus 2, that gives me 5. And the -2 plus 2 cancels, which leaves me with b. So now my equation line, that the parallel line, it is y equals 2x, since my b is positive, plus 5. Now, what if I'm still looking for a parallel line, but my points are negative, better yet, not even negative. What if it's positive 2, 3? What would that look like? What would be my y-intercept now? Well, instead of a -1, we're putting in a 2. So now 3 equals 2 times 2 plus b. Bring down my 3, and 2 times 2, that gives me 4. I subtract 4 on both sides. The 4's cancel on the right, which leaves me with my b. And 3 minus 4 is a -1. So now, if my b is negative, I put -1. So remember, when it comes to your y equals mx plus b, The plus is interchangeable with a minus because if your b is negative, then it's going to be -1. If your b is positive, it's going to be a +1 or a +5. Any questions on parallel lines? All right, next up we have perpendicular lines, which means the slope of the first line times the negative reciprocal of the slope of the line. Both of them should equal -1. So if my slope is 2, the perpendicular slope would be -1/2. Because 2 times a -1/2, that gives me a -1. What if you have a fraction and you have -2/3? Well, the negative reciprocal or the inverse flipped fraction would be 3/2. And as you can see, -2 times 3, that gives me a -6. 3 times 2 also gives me 6. -6/6 still gives me my -1. So when you are trying to find a perpendicular line, you must make sure that you have the opposite and flipped of the fraction or whole number in order for it to be perpendicular. If it's positive, it must become negative. If it's a whole number, you flip it. If it's a fraction, you still flip it. So now, how can we do perpendicular lines? Here's a good one. -9, 2. And the line given is y equals 3x minus 12. Label x, label y. Now, to make it perpendicular, the slope must be flipped and invert. So, if M1 is 3, my M2 is a -1/3. You're going to take your M2 and your current point and write the equation of the perpendicular line. Y equals mx plus b. We have to find b. Y is 2 equals a -1/3. X is a -9. Remember those signs. Plus b. Now, bring down my 2. Negative 1/3 times a negative 9 is a positive 9/3. Because remember, whole number, you place it over 1 when multiplying to a fraction. So negative and negative makes positive. 1 times 9 is 9. 3 times 1 is 3. Plus b. Now, 9/3 gives me 3 plus b. Minus 3 on both sides. Cross out my 3's. 2 minus 3, that's a -1, and that equals b. So my perpendicular line equation, try saying that 5 times 5, is y equals -1/3 x minus 1. Any questions on perpendicular? All right, beautiful people, we are moving into solving inequalities. By using addition and subtraction. So, if you guys remember, when we first started, I told you about the equal sign, the less than, greater than, less than, equal to, and the greater than, equal to signs. Now, when you are solving inequalities, you solve inequalities, which are these, the same way as you would solve the equal sign. For example, x plus 5 is greater than 2. To get my x by itself, I minus 5 on both sides. Bring down my x, cancel out my 5's, and x is still greater than 2 minus 5, which is a -3. Now, how do I write this on a number line? Well, you simply can make you a nice little number line where you have 0 on one side, you can have 3 on this side, and -3 on the other side, or you can write out all the numbers, whichever you prefer. And if it's greater than, you have an open circle on the number line, and you shade with the arrow to the left. Well, no, correction. Since x is greater than -3, I'm going to shade to the right. So shading, and draw my arrow. If it was x was less than a -3, we would shade to the left. Now, say for instance, you have x minus 4 is less than or equal to 7. I would add my 4 on both sides because I must still get my x by itself. Bring down my x, cancel out my 4's, and bring down my less than equal to sign. And 7 plus 4 is 11. So now, on a number line, zero here, 11 here, negative 11 here. And since x is less than or equal to, you must shade and go to the left. So less than or equal to's, greater than or equal to's. You have a closed circle, meaning the circle is filled in, and you shade to the left if it's positive, shade to the right shade to the left if it's less than equal to, shade to the right if it's greater than or equal to. Most important thing I want you to remember, if it has a line under it, such as the less than equal to or greater than equal to, you close your circle. If it does not, such as the less than greater than, you have an open circle. So filled circle, less than equal to, greater than equal to, open circle, less than greater than. Any questions on adding and subtracting? Inequalities. All right, moving on to multiplying and dividing inequalities. Same process. Say for instance, I have x over 4 and it's less than 5. To get x by itself, I must multiply both sides of the inequality by 4. The 4's cancel, which gives me my x is less than 20. Draw my line. And really, if you want to, you can just draw the number 20, a circle, and since it's less than, that means it's going to the left, and you draw your arrow. All right. Moving on. If I have three x is greater than 24, and you can draw your greater than as a beak, as a gator mouth, or the or if you're looking at your keyboard, if you look where the period is, that is what the greater than sign is if you hit the shift button. Also, the less than sign is shift the comma button. Whichever way you draw it, make sure you have the mouth facing either the left or the right, depending on how you want your statement read. So if 3x is greater than 24, it's going to point, the mouth is going to open at the 3x. If 3x was less than 24, or now 3x greater than 24, I'm going to divide 3 on both sides, because in order to get rid of the 3 next to the x, I must divide it from the x. So now 3 divided by 3 cancels, and that gives you an x is greater than 24 divided by 3, that is 8. So now place my 8, place my circle, and since x is greater than 8, I draw my arrow to the right. Now, there are 2 things in inequalities that will change the direction of the inequality sign. 2 things will cause the inequality sign to change. Say, for instance, I have 24 is less than 3x. Now, I would divide 3 still, because I must get my x by itself, and that'll say that 8 is less than x. Now, for graphing purposes, or for those who like to write their letters from left to right, because mostly when you're doing an inequality statement, the variable always comes first. Therefore, if I write x first, that means my inequality changes, or it flips and points in the same direction. So if 8 is less than x, that means x is greater than 8. As you can see, when I flipped it, I made sure that the mouth still stayed in front of the x, because the statement read as follows: 8 is less than x. So that means if I draw my line, if 8 is less than x, that means I have an open circle and all my answers are going to be to the right of x, such as 9, 10, 11, 32, because 8 is less than x, which means x is greater than 8. All right, next thing. You have negative numbers in multiplication and division. If you are multiplying or dividing by a negative number, it will change the direction of the inequality. Such as, if I had negative x over 4 is greater than 5, multiply both of them by negative 4. The negative 4's cancel, and my x is less than a negative 20. The reason why it changes is because anytime you multiply a negative, or anytime you have a is less than b, which will be x is less than 5, but your answer c, when you're multiplying, is less than 0, then x changes to where it becomes greater than 20, or a is greater than b. So whenever you are multiplying and dividing by a negative number, remember, when you multiplying and dividing by a negative number, you must change the sign of the inequality. So once I find this answer, of course, negative 20, open circle, less than 20, we're going to the left. Same process as if I have a negative 4x is less than equal to 16. Divide both sides by negative 4. Those cancel, and my x is greater than equal to a negative 4. Because 16, a negative divided by a positive divided by a negative is negative. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And if I draw my number line, and put a negative 4, I shade in my circle. X is greater than, so we're going to the right, shading to the right, and I make my arrow. Any questions on solving inequalities for multiplication and division? Now, we move on to solving compound inequalities. What is a compound inequality? What that means is, say for instance, x is greater than 2, but x is also less than 9. Compound equality says that 2 is less than x and x is still less than 9. So if you remember earlier in the week, we had something like this. Now you can solve for something like this, such as if I had, because most compound inequalities, they show up exactly as compound inequalities. So say for instance, I had 2 is less than x plus 5 is less than 9. So when you're solving and the middle part has a plus 5 or minus 5, you do what we always do. Minus 5 on all sides. Because if I broke this down, this would be x plus 5 is greater than 2, and x plus 5 is less than 9. Compound equalities allow me to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, meaning I can subtract everything by 5 and get the correct compound inequality. Okay, so now x plus 5 and the plus 5 and minus 5, that cancels, and that leaves me with x. I still have 2 is going to be less, the answer is going to be less than x, and x is going to be less than the next answer. So now 2 minus 5, that gives me a negative 3, because 5 minus 2 is 3. Biggest number is negative, so the answer must be negative. 9 minus 5, that gives me 4. Now, once I graph this, I would put 0 in the middle. And you could put 4, of course, to the right because it's positive. Negative 3 to the left because it's negative. And open circle, and you shade in the middle. This is what you consider an and statement. X is greater than 2, and it is less than 9. And statement means I'm going to draw 2 circles, whether they're open or closed, because it could have been greater than, equal to, less than, equal to. Closed circles, open circles, shade in the middle. So this compound equality says, hey, if both signs are pointing to the left, meaning less than signs, you have 2 less than signs in the compound equality. That means you have open circles or closed circles, and you shade in the middle, meaning they're going to meet each other. Now, another compound inequality is when you have the or, meaning x is greater than, or x is less than 2. Usually those are not drawn together. Typically they are separate. So this is what they look like. Say for instance, you have 2x plus 3 is less than 9, or 2x what's this? Correction. 3x minus 6 is greater than 12. Still solve them the normal way. Minus 3 on both sides to the first one gives me my 2x is less than 9 minus 3, that's 6. Divide by 2, divide by 2. X is less than 3. 3x minus 6 is greater than 12. So we have plus 6 plus 6. 3x is greater than 6. 12 plus 6, that gives me 18. Divide by 3. Divide by 3. And x is greater than 6. Because 6 times 3 is 18. So now, how do I graph this on a number line? With an or statement, they are not connected. They will not touch each other. They will not graph going in the same direction. So I have 3 and I have 6. Yes, you can graph it like this. So if x is less than 3, I'm making an open circle and I'm shading to the left. Or x is greater than 6, I'm making an open circle and I'm shading to the right. Best way you can know that you're dealing with the or statement, it literally has the word or in it. And if it's an or statement, your two answers are going away from each other, not towards each other. Any questions before we move on to our next section? All right. Moving on to our next section, which is solve absolute value equations. All right, so solving the absolute value equations. What does that mean? If your equation if the absolute value of your linear equation equals C, that means your linear equation will equal the original C, or your linear equation will equal the inverse of C. For example, absolute value of X equals 7. Keep in mind the absolute value means how many units from 0. So, how many units from 0 is the absolute value? Is this absolute value? So, we know that is 7 units. Now, what two numbers are exactly 7 units from 0? Because the absolute value of X simply means how many units of this X is from 0, right? So now, absolute value of X equals 7, that is X equals 7. Or X equals a negative 7. Now, rule of thumb, your absolute value can never, the equation, meaning X plus 2, it can never equal a negative number, such as negative 3. Based on the rule of absolute value, this cannot be, because nothing you put inside of absolute value will ever equal to a negative number. Therefore, there is no solution to an absolute value equaling a negative number. Now, when you're solving the absolute value and it has this positive number, either X can be positive or X can be negative. But that's on the inside, not the outside. So now, if Say for instance, you have 2x plus 3. The absolute value of 2x plus 3 it equals 7. Well, since the absolute value statement equals a positive number, you can find your two solutions. So you have 2x plus 3 equals 7. Or 2x plus 3 equals a negative 7. So now I'm going to subtract 3 on both sides. Cancel, cancel, bring down my 2x, bring down my 2x, equals 7 minus 3, that gives me 4. Negative 7 minus 3, that gives me a negative 10. Divide both sides by 2, divide both sides by 2. And x equals 2, or x can equal negative 5 to give you your equation absolute value units equaling 7. Now, are both statements true? Well, absolute value of 2 times 2 plus 3 equals 7. Two times 2, that gives me 4 plus 3, and that equals 7. And of course, 7 equals 7 because the absolute value of 7 is still 7. Now, if I put in my negative 5, two times negative 5, that's a negative 10. Negative 10 plus 3, that's a negative 7. And of course, the absolute value of a negative is positive. Therefore, both of my answers equal 7. Any questions? All right, guys. Well, this is all I really had planned for today. So I am opening the lineup for any questions that we learned, for anything that we learned for today. If you have any question, of course, you can comment them below. Question all questions, because all questions are important, and I do look forward to hearing from you. I'm glad you were able to tune in for this lesson for today. It will be up and available when this live ends on my Facebook and my YouTube page. All you have to do is click on the live, rewind, and review. So, without further ado, if you have any questions, please comment below, and I am here to help. Other than that, I hope you are having a fantastic Friday. Well, guys, if we do not have any questions, I am going to go ahead and end the live. Now, we will tune back in tomorrow at 1 p.m. while I will continue my key points on Algebra 1. Please tune in at 1 p.m. It's going to be from 1 to 4. So grab your pen, grab your paper, grab your graphing paper if you have any, and I might even let you use a calculator. So tomorrow, July 11th at 1 p.m., see me here again. We're going to do algebra. We're going to finish up and round out our Algebra 1 key component lessons, things that you need to know in order to move forward into your Algebra 1 lesson plans. For those of you who are parents who plan to homeschool your children, learning how to do Algebra 1, I know it's a little tough, but hey, we're in this together. Kids, I understand that your math learning was interrupted. That is okay. That is what I am here for. If you have any questions outside of this live, you can inbox me, you can DM me. You can even text me at 205-542-5062. 205-542-5062. Let me know that you watched the live. If you need additional information on tutoring or any information that you learned for today or any of our videos of tutoring, please know I am here to help. I hope you enjoyed this for today because I enjoyed teaching you. Have a blessed and prosperous Friday. Dine and unwind and enjoy yourselves because, hey, it's the weekend, guys. So see you tomorrow, 1 p.m. Don't be late. I look forward to hearing from you. Of course, this is Miss Chris of Mathematics for You Tutorial Services, LLC, where we are changing mindsets one problem at a time. Have